Welcome back to Bad Bible Stories. I want to talk about two stories today, Esther and Ruth. These are the only two books of the Bible that are named for women, and they are often cited when Christians are criticized for the Bible being patriarchal, for God not treating women well. And so I think it's really important to look at these stories and what they actually say rather than if you're like me and you grew up in Christianity, we kind of heard sanitized versions as kids about what these stories really were. So I'll walk us through both the stories and then talk about how, like, what they actually say about God's view of women, or more likely the male author's view of women. So first, Ruth. The story of Ruth starts, actually, I brought my Bible just to make sure I didn't get anything wrong, with Naomi. So Naomi is married, has two boys. Those boys get married, and Ruth is her daughter-in-law. Naomi befalls terrible tragedy. She loses her husband and she loses her sons. And so now Naomi and Ruth and Orpah, the other daughter-in-law, are in a bad situation. They don't have men to financially care for them. And at that time, that was bad. You were in a bad spot. So Naomi leaves where they are to go back to essentially like her homeland. She tells the girls or the women, hey, you go be with your families. Do what you need to do. Ruth says, no way, I'm staying with you. And this decision is upheld as something really virtuous, as self-sacrificial. And she basically says, no, I love you. I want to stay with you. And I'm also going to worship your God as well. Naomi is touched and says, wow, that's amazing. And off they go. So now Naomi is a widow, as well as Ruth, and they have to figure out how to find enough food to survive. So they are essentially kind of picking up scraps. I don't know if scraps is the right word. They are sort of going behind in the fields after the harvest is collected, and the extras that are left over in the field, they're picking up so that they have something to eat. At this point, hang on, make sure I get all the details right. So Ruth is doing this, and they run into Boaz. Boaz is kind of a middle-aged dude, probably sort of good looking, and has some money. So he would be a catch for Ruth at the time. And so Boaz noticed Ruth, and he's like, oh, stay in my field. You can keep gleaning in my field. And Ruth is touched, and she tells Naomi, hey, this guy noticed me. What do I do, essentially? Naomi kind of gives her instructions how to get his attention, how to basically almost like propose to him without proposing, basically saying, hi, I'm available to you to be your wife. So when Ruth follows Naomi's directions, Boaz says, great, I'll do it, but I got to do a little wheeling and dealing, because really this is a financial transaction rather than just a marriage proposal. So he goes to officials in the city. They work out who's going to buy which land, and Boaz purchases land, and with that land purchase, he also essentially purchases Ruth. And now Ruth has a place to stay, and she brings Naomi with her, and they're taken care of. Hooray! And that's the whole story. So when I was a kid, I remember, listening to like Adventures in Odyssey or something telling this story, and so much is made of Ruth and how faithful she was and how good she was. But what's really interesting is nowhere in this story is anyone praying. Like, God doesn't speak in the story. No one asks God for help. Only at the beginning does Naomi say, hey man, God screwed me over. And then that's it. It's not even addressed again, which I thought is interesting. And I think that comes back into play with Esther. So let's quick go over Esther. And I think you'll see the similarities in these two books. So Esther is a much darker story. Really kind of terrible things happen in the book of Esther. This is such a patriarchal story. And for all the praise this book gets for showing the strength of women, what it really shows is how women were treated as property. And it's a hard read, I think. So at the beginning of the book of Esther, we start with King Xerxes, and he wants his wife, his queen, to come and parade around for his friends. So his friends can all see how beautiful she is. And she refuses. She's like, no, man, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be a trophy for your friends. And all of his friends are like, that's terrible. Like, no one can know that the queen doesn't obey the king. You better get rid of her. So he's like, yeah, you're right. That's good advice. I should get rid of her. She's not perfectly obedient. And so then his advisors are like, okay, so good. You got rid of her. Now let's find all the most beautiful virgins, and we will collect them and we will make them all pretty for you. So they do that. And one of the virgins that they find is Esther. And apparently the people who come and collect Esther don't know that she's Jewish. Now, in none of this does Esther consent to any of this, right? She's not like, oh, yes, that sounds like fun. Esther is just ordered to go. And something that we kind of skimmed over as kids when talking about this story is Esther gets taken into a harem, and the queen is picked, like the king picks which queen he wants, not just by looking at them, but by sleeping with them one by one. And if he likes them, they get promoted to his second harem. And he decides after he sleeps with Esther, then he decides that he likes her so much she's going to be queen. Again, there's no consent in this process, right? These are just objects that the king is collecting and likes. So in this story, it then becomes about how another one of the king's advisors feels, what's the word? He feels put down? No, that's not the right word. He feels not honored by Mordecai, Esther's uncle. And because this guy feels like someone was rude to him, that Mordecai would not bow down to him, he's decided what the king should do is just exterminate the entire population of Jews in the entire realm, in that entire kingdom, which is bonkers, right? And so Esther gets to be the hero of the story because she bravely approaches her husband at this point and says, please don't kill all the Jews. I'm Jewish too. And so it's supposed to be like a happy story at the end because the king doesn't. And instead he's like, oh, actually I'm gonna kill Haman because, that advisor. So many people are terrible in this story, and it, instead of just highlighting the bravery of Esther, which, by the way, of course, that was incredibly brave of Esther, it just highlights that women had nearly no power, they had no autonomy, and they were subject to incredibly cruel men. who didn't seem to value human life that wasn't just like them. And the book of Esther, again, she doesn't pray to God. She doesn't say, God, show me the way how to do this. It's just a story about a brave woman. And I think so many of us who grew up listening to these stories, God was sort of implanted into the story, right? That, well, Esther leaned on God and she was faithful to God. But that's actually not really in there. She loves her people and she thinks, ending the lives of all of her people is wrong, as, hopefully do we all. But it's such an interesting book because it's not really about God or, her relationship to God. So for both of these stories, Ruth and Esther, they don't actually invoke God. They're just more historical narratives. But what really kind of irks me about both of these stories is it reminds me so much of like old Disney movies, where the Disney princess, like I think Cinderella is a perfect example. Cinderella was supposed to be good because she was very obedient and she was very kind and very, like, she never gave anybody any trouble. And if she was just obedient enough and kind enough, one day a man would save her. And that's exactly what, like, especially the story of Ruth reminds me of, is the woman is not even the hero of the story. She's just being meek and obedient and kind. And these two books, this is what the Bible is giving us, as far as women. How does God see women? And I know there are other mentions of women who do some intense things. There's a story of her name starts with a J. It's eluding me. But the woman who like drives a stake through someone's head because he's a bad guy. I mean, some women do some intense things, right? But for the most part, the only two women who get their own book, their entire stories are about subservience and them being gentle and sweet. Again, Esther definitely shows bravery, but it also just shows how limited her options were, and how much men controlled her entire existence. So I call these still bad stories of the Bible because I don't think it does either woman any justice. And again, these are the only two books of the Bible that are centered around women. And it's still just centered around women's oppression. Where are all the books of the Bible that are about women's role in being strong and a leader and being autonomous? And, I think having these two books does more to demonstrate how patriarchal the Bible is, rather than any benefit to God valuing women.